Welcome back, everybody. I'm Brian Holmes, president and lead pastor of Empowered Christian Ministries and author of Ready, Set, Go, a 30-day guide for new believers, faith foundations for the Christian life. This video is being made to help facilitate your one-on-one discipleship or small group discussion time. If you don't have the book yet, get a copy from your church or small group leader, or there's links to all the versions available at empoweredchristian.org/ready, set, go. If you're with your group now, just save the link and order it later. If you have any newcomers to the group, pause the video now and do the short icebreaker that I gave on day 15. All right, let's dive into the lesson. This week we're doing day 17. How did we get the Bible? Is it reliable? This week you've already read through this chapter and we looked at how we got the books of the Bible. We asked the question, can we trust them? Does what we have now match the originals? And are the modern translations both accurate and reliable? We looked at what the canon is, which is our selection of which texts are included in the Bible. This word canon comes from a word that means rule or measuring stick. And it is these series of books that are our standard or our rule of faith. The reason these books are included is because they bear the marks of authenticity. They have a reputable origin. They show signs of divine inspiration. They're accurate. They have doctrinal truth, consistency, power, and overall acceptance by God's people. Out of all of the different canons and books that are accepted by traditional Christians, there are 66 that are commonly accepted, 66 books, poems, and letters written over 1,600 years from about 1500 BC to AD 100 by over 40 kings, prophets, historians, and early church leaders. You learned about how there's 39 books of the Old Testament and how we have these in common with modern day Jews. However, they do number the books and organize them differently. We also looked at how the New Testament has 27 books, and these were written between 45 and 95 AD. How many of these were recognized and accepted very early on, and the canon that we currently have, the 27 as they are now listed, begins as early as AD 367 and then was confirmed at the Synod of Carthage in 397. And before we look at the next section, which was called the Apocrypha, let's first go around the room and just share any thoughts or insights that anyone has and just open this up to conversation. What do you think about what was learned here about the Old Testament canon and the New Testament canon? What are your thoughts? Let's just open this up for conversations. Pause the video and do that now. All right, great. So next in the book, we talked about the apocryphal section. This is the books that were included in some of the older Protestant canons and are still included in some of the Orthodox and Catholic canons today. These were books before the New Testament, before Jesus, and there's disagreement about which books to include depending on which denominational affiliation you're connected with. There's 7 to 15 different types of texts depending on which denomination, but they don't all include the same ones. Though I do indicate that it is okay to read these, there's historical value there, and there's also possibly some spiritual significance to some of these. But really, with the weight that Protestants give to the Bible, meaning as it's our authoritative source of all things faith and life, we really need to be 100% confident in the books that we have in our canon. And so reasons why they should be included as part of the Apocrypha and excluded from our canon, I listed several, including 1, their rejection by Jesus and the apostles. Not one of them is quoted in the New Testament, but all but 8 of the 39 Old Testament books are. 2, their rejection by the Jewish community, who, as we looked at last week, were the keepers of God's law. 3, their rejection also by many Catholics. 4, some false teachings in them that even contradict the universally accepted books. And then 5, their lack of prophetic fulfillment or foresight. So we can treat these as valuable historical books, but we should not include them as part of the inspired or authoritative scripture. So let's go ahead and pause the video now and just take turns around the room just sharing any thoughts you have. Are these good arguments? What do you think? Do you think they should be included in the canon? Why or why not? What are your thoughts about it? Have you ever read any of these books and so forth? Did you come out of a tradition that includes them in their Bible? Just any other thoughts you guys have that you wanted to discuss amongst yourselves as a group. Next in the chapter, we looked at what transmission is. We're asking the question, has the Bible been changed? And we looked at this process of copying manuscripts in order to preserve them for future generations. This is called transmission. You learned about the plethora of manuscript evidence that we have, including over 25,000 of just the New Testament, 10,000 Latin manuscripts, 9,300 in other languages, 5,900 in the original language that it was written in, Koine Greek. We looked at how old some of these are dated, right? One of them is dated as early as AD 110. We have the entire Bible in the Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus dated to AD 330 and 340, which is incredible that we have a copy of the New Testament in its present form with all the entire canon and everything dated that early. It's incredible, almost 1700 years old, and it's still extant. It still exists. We also looked at some of the other things, the ancient manuscript evidence. We looked at how even before the Nicaea Council, the early church fathers, the ante-Nicene fathers, quoted from the New Testament so frequently that we could nearly put together the entire New Testament out of just their quotations alone. We also looked at how the Old Testament is very reliable as well, even though it goes back even farther, right? Jesus at his time, we looked at this last week, Jesus and the other apostles are quoting from it as though what they have is God's word. And so they authenticated it themselves. And so, but even just historically speaking, we can look at multiple things in order to have confidence that what we have now in our Old Testament is reliable. The entire Old Testament is also included in the Codex Vaticanus, dated AD 340. We also talked about the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 20th century and how they found over 300 manuscripts of the Old Testament books that were hidden in a cave untouched for over 2,000 years. We were able to compare that with what we have been transmitting all of this time to see that it has been accurately transmitted and copied and preserved by comparing it to these 2,000-year-old versions that were just discovered less than 100 years ago. And every book of the Old Testament was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls except for the book of Esther. It was all written in Hebrew and dated between 250 BC and AD 70. So that gives us a lot of confidence just from a historical, scientific perspective. We're able to see all of this. And so, yes, we do have to rely on faith when it comes to trusting in what is written. However, we can have absolute confidence with our logical reasoning part of our brain by knowing we actually have proof and sound evidence to trust that what has been copied and preserved and continued on all of these years is consistently matching the originals. So what are your thoughts about that? Does this build up your faith reading through this section? Does it give you confidence that yes, because Satan gets in people's minds and starts thinking, oh, there's, copies, there's copyists, and there's like the telephone game where you hear one thing and then you say it, but you tweak it just a little bit and you keep through mistakes and by the time it gets to where we are today, it's not even close to the original. These are the lies and the accusations that we hear about that people who are opponents of the faith accuse Christians of. Oh, it's been changed and manipulated and altered. Even the Quran says this. Muhammad said that there was already errors in the Bible at his time, and this was 7th century. And Muslims today still quote this, right? Saying, oh yeah, the Bible, the parts of it that were reliable, but then other stuff was added in and changed and manipulated over time. Mormons as well, right? This is part of their movement, was that corruptions were brought into the Bible. And so they needed these new modern prophets, Joseph Smith and others, who were going to set the story straight and tell us what what got lost somewhere during the process of the copying and so forth over the years. But the truth is, the Bible is so reliable and trustworthy and true. We don't have to worry that things have been corrupted or things were lost or new things were added in. It's just not true. These are just conspiracy theories. So let's pause the video and share any thoughts that anyone has about this transmission process, the historical reliability of it. All right, and last but not least, we looked at, are the modern translations accurate and reliable? We talked about how it was translated very early on into 7 languages by AD 200. So in less than 200 years, it had already been disseminated into 7 languages and 13 languages by AD 500. We looked at the very earliest Old English translations, beginning already in 676 and then continuing through John Wycliffe, Tyndale, Coverdale, and others. There are over 50 English modern translations now, but we have some good reasons for why this is the case. Now, some publishers just wanted to make their own versions, and that's fine. But we actually have good reasons why we have multiple translations. There's different goals and agendas and reading levels for each of these things. We looked at how there are 2 primary camps. You have those that prioritize the earlier dated but less of Alexandrian manuscripts. This includes the vast majority, including the NASB, the ESV, the NIV, and so forth. And then you have some Bibles that prioritize the later dated but majority Byzantine manuscripts, like the King James Version, the New King James, the Young's translation, and so forth. Now, I didn't unpack this a ton, but let me just add a comment or two. The main difference, what I mean by Alexandrian, this means it was central to the area of Alexandria, Egypt, which is where the earliest versions of these come from. And so it's identified as that. It's also, when I said earlier dated, what I mean is that we have copies of it that go back earlier. The ones that we talked about earlier, the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus, those are both dated to the 4th century. And so even the ones that go back earlier, the manuscript piece that was that's dated 110 AD, and the earlier ones in that range, they all go back to the Alexandrian manuscripts. Now, they're earlier dated, so many believe that they're more reliable because they're closer to the original date, the original first writing, which is called the autograph. However, because they go back further, but we have less overall numbers of them. I said in the New Testament, we have 25,000 manuscript pieces. Now, most of those are not very young, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th century. Most of those are later centuries. And so the Alexandrian manuscripts go back earlier. So many believe that they're more reliable as a result of that, even though they're a smaller percentage of the total collection of manuscripts that we have. Now, those that are more the Byzantine manuscripts, this is called the majority text because it's what we have the most of. These are the ones that show up later, 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th century, 15th century, and so forth, right? The later, older ones. We have a lot more of these just because they came later. It's easier to have the older stuff, right? Or the newer stuff. It's less time has passed and the church was well established by this point. So it was easier to preserve them. They weren't persecuted. They weren't like a little minority sect in the middle of a dangerous persecution periods and all that kind of stuff. It was easier to preserve these things and spread it around. And so that's kind of the main difference. Do you prioritize the earlier Alexandrian stuff or the ones we have more of? And that original is called the minority text because it's less. Or do you preserve the ones that prefer and prioritize the ones we have more of, even though they come later? And so many reason it'd be easier to add in stuff over the centuries as a result. I also explained the different types of translations. There are the formal equivalents, which is the literal word for word translations. These are a little bit more rigid, but they adhere closer to the original language. These are better for in depth Bible studies, such as the NASB, the ESV, and the NKJV. And then you have those that are the dynamic equivalences, like the NIV, the BSB, the CSB. These are functional. They're more of a thought for thought translation, less concerned with the original grammatical form. These are better for understanding the meaning of the text, not necessarily the original language and how it relates to the original language. And then you have the paraphrases like the NLT, the NIRV, and the Message. And these are retelling all or part of what is meant to convey what they believe to be the meaning is. These are better for the less educated, for adolescents, English as a second language, or just for an easier, more casual reading. If you're just going to go for a walk and want to listen to the Bible, these are great options to do with that. And I quoted in the lesson Proverbs 11, verse 14, which says, "Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in the abundance of counselors, there is safety." And this is something that we have. We have many translations, all with different committees, many different denominations, and different people involved, all balancing one another out. We also have this plethora of manuscript evidence, many different languages, down now from nearly 20 centuries, early church fathers. We just have this abundance of all this content. And all of this helps us balance out and figure out where error has snuck in and where the truth really is. And this helps us have a well-balanced confidence in our Bible. In lieu of journaling this week, I suggested doing a Bible study to really unpack some of these things and think about them more deeply, right? One of the ways we love the Lord is with all of our mind. And so I recommended looking and comparing multiple Bible translations using a Bible parallel. I gave a link to one, as well as examining the original languages using an interlinear, and I gave a link to one. And so let's just unpack for a little bit of time with our groups now. When you compare different translations, what do you notice? What do you think about the ways that we're doing it and how literal and how close they are to the text? Are you noticing big differences, small differences? When you compare it to an interlinear, do you notice which ones are kind of adding in more words in order to explain it, sort of a thought for thought, or the ones that are more literal and it's very specifically word for word translated? So let's just unpack that a little bit now. Let's go around the room. Just start with the host and share any thoughts you have, and then go around the room, take turns, 60 to 90 seconds each or so, and just share any thoughts you have. Maybe you wrote down certain, whatever verse you went to go look at and compare, share that with one another and any insights you gained, any questions you have, and just kind of unpack and share that. I'd love to hear which ones you guys ended up studying later, but we'll come back to that in a minute. So pause the video and discuss that now. All right. I pray that this lesson this week has been a blessing to you, that it really gave you confidence in the Bible, in its reliability, in its preservation, and in the fact that God has preserved it supernaturally to make sure that we have everything we need for faith in life, and really to have confidence that what we have is what He provided through the original authors. So I definitely would love to hear your thoughts. Visit empoweredchristian.org/ready, set, go. Get a link to the e-course version and leave them there in your notes in the discussion area, or go to the YouTube channel and leave comments below the video there. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts, and I want to hear, is this making you more confident? Are you ready to go deeper into your study of the Bible after learning these things? I hope so. All right, we'll see you next week. Go ahead and read day 18 this week, and then we'll see you next week. All right, take care. God bless.